Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I love to knit. This video is a quick little video to teach you how to do the cast on for my latest pattern, Hoodola. Many of you participated in the Caltopus mystery knit along this fall, and we had an absolute blast together. We ended up knitting a hood that had some really complex elements to it, some really fun stitches, but I think that a lot of us are finding that we are obsessed with knitting hoods for this fall and winter. So I wanted to take the concept of Complextopus and create just like a vanilla pattern, a really simple pattern for those of you who want something easier to sink your needles into. Hoodola is a breeze to knit. I think the trickiest part is the cast on, and I want to go over that slowly and in detail. So here you go. You will need to have purchased the pattern to follow along with this video. I'll link to it below, and you can also find it on my website and Ravelry. So let's jump right in with Judy's Magic Cast On. I have a way that I love to work it. Okay, so we're starting with Judy's Magic Cast On, and the first thing that you need to make sure is that you have a long enough tail for working the cast on. You're casting on 130 stitches for Hoodola, so the first thing that I'm going to do is figure out how much yarn I need for my tail. And the way that I do that is I wrap my yarn loosely 10 times around my needles. And once I see how much yarn 10 stitches use, I'll take that length and do this 13 times. And then that's about 130. I didn't do it quite 13 times there. And then always give yourself just a little bit extra for just in case. The trick with doing that is to make sure that you wrap your yarn loosely around your needle. Now, as I get going with Judy's Magic Cast On, I'm not going to cast on the same number of stitches as is written in the pattern because that is a path to crazy town for you to watch me do that. But what I'm doing is setting up with my yarn over my needle, and I've got my tail to the front of my needle and my working yarn to the back of my needle. And then I'm going to bring up the other end of my needle. I am working with a circular needle for Hoodola that is at least 36 inches long. Make sure that you have a needle that has a nice flexible cable. It's going to be much more difficult to work this if your cable is really stiff. So I've got my yarn going over that back needle. I've got my tail going to the front. And now I'm going to bring the yarn coming over the back of that back needle to the front and my tail to the back. And you can see that I've got the yarn tensioned over my thumb and my index finger. Now the trick to Judy's Magic Cast On is the yarn going over my index finger makes a stitch on the front needle, and the yarn going over my thumb makes a stitch on the back needle. And since I already have a stitch on my back needle, which counts as my first stitch, I'm going to take my index finger, go in front of my front needle, and bring that yarn in between those two needles. And then I'm going to take the yarn on my thumb, bring it in between my two needles, and bring it over the back needle. And then I'll take my index finger, come in front, and go like that. And now you can see I have 2 stitches on my back needle and 2 stitches on my front needle. You might get lost and be like, I'm not sure what goes next. When I get lost doing Judy's Magic Cast On, I just look for which stitch I made last, and I can see that the yarn coming off my index finger is the last stitch I worked. So I'll take my thumb and go in between, and then I'll take my index finger and go in between, and then thumb, and then index finger, and then thumb, and then index finger. And you're going to continue like this. You are going to do this until you have 65 stitches on the back needle and 65 stitches on the front needle. I am going to work it with fewer stitches like that. You are always going to end with a stitch on the needle that is closer to you, on that front needle. And then the final move that you want to do is take your tail and bring it over your working yarn. And what that does is anchor the tail when you go to knit the first stitch. Now, the next step, once you have this done, is to do the setup rounds. So let's go, rows. Let's go ahead and do those rows together. Okay, I'm really glad I made that mistake and I said rounds instead of rows, because one of the differences working Judy's Magic Cast On in Hoodola is that you're working fabric flat and not in the round. So Hoodola starts at the very top of the hood and is worked flat down to the neckline until you join into the round. So we're going to work setup rows 1 and 2 together, and this is really going to get you going with the cast on for Hoodola. So underneath the camera right here, I've got my tail over that last stitch worked, so I grab it. And then I'm going to take my needles and turn them so that my needles are pointing towards the right. And I'm going to pull out that bottom needle. And then I'm going to be ready to just work into that first stitch right there. This is where you're going to find that it's really helpful to have a flexible cable on your needle. I find sometimes the people that are struggling with doing this cast on are working with the needle with a cable that is not flexible enough. So I am working setup row 1. So I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to bring my yarn to the front of my work. I'm going to slip the next stitch. I'm going to bring my yarn to the back, and I am going to knit the third stitch, and then I'm going to place a marker. And I like this marker to be a fun marker because this marker tells me that I'm at the beginning of my row. So using a fun marker here is the way that you're going to know where you are in your pattern. And now you're going to knit to the end of the first needle. For you all, that's going to be 62 stitches if you got 65 stitches onto that top needle. And I am going to knit across all of those stitches. And then I am going to pick up a stitch in this cast on edge. And I like to pick up, if you kind of look right there, I like to pick up this little loop right here. Let me see if I can get my needle underneath it for you without splitting it. And then I am going to wrap my yarn around and pull it through. And what that does is kind of soften the very tip of Hoodola. It doesn't matter that much, but that's the place that I like to pick up that stitch. Now, I'm only halfway through the row at this point. So what I'm going to do is turn my needles clockwise so that they're facing right. I am going to push the top needle back, and then I am going to pull the bottom needle out, and I am going to continue knitting across until I get to the last 3 stitches. And I'm still on setup row 1 at this point. And I'm knitting across to the last 3 stitches. And now I'm going to place a marker. And the reason I'm placing these markers is they let me know when I'm at my end stitches for working my edging. But this marker I'm going to place is going to be kind of a boring marker so that I know it is the stitch marker at the end of the row and not at the beginning of the row. And now I am going to knit one. I'm going to bring my yarn to the front, slip one knitwise, and then I am going to knit that last stitch, and I am at the end of row 1. Now, if you are used to working Judy's Magic Cast On in the round, you're going to try to automatically turn your needles like that to continue working in the round. But since you're at the end of the row, what you want to do is turn your work so that you're looking at the wrong side of your fabric, and then you're going to work row 2, which is a wrong side row. And I'm going to slip that first stitch with the yarn in front. I am going to knit that next stitch. I am going to slip that next stitch. And now I am going to purl to the end of this needle, which is only halfway through the row. So when I get to the end of this row, I am going to turn my work so that my needles are facing to the right, and I'm going to push that top needle back, just like that, and then I'm going to pull that bottom needle out, and then I am going to continue purling to the last 3 stitches, which is purling to that fun octopus marker that I have. And then I am going to slip that marker. I am going to slip one purlwise with the yarn in front. I am going to knit one, and then I'm going to slip one purlwise with yarn in front. If you find that that first stitch is a little loose, you can just pull up with your tail right there. Now I am at the end of row 2. I'm not going to continue to turn like that. I'm going to flip over so that I've got my right side facing. And now I'm going to be repeating rows 1 and 2. And to do that, I'm going to knit one, slip one, knit one, and then I'm going to knit to the end of the needle, not the end of the row. And when I get to the end of the needle, I need to continue across that row. I'm trying to knit fast here by turning my work clockwise, pushing that top needle back, and then pulling that bottom needle out, and then continuing to work across. Now, what I saw in Celtopus, and I want to kind of talk about it here, is at this point, if I went and knit this stitch right here, you'll see I end up with this kind of like loose kind of float right there. You want that to be nice and tight and tidy. So if you fold your fabric so that you have that point of the hood at the back of the hood right there, and you go in and work into that stitch right there, you're not going to have those floats where you're turning to work the second half of the row, and you're going to be much happier with your knitting right there. So that was a point that I saw a few people getting frustrated, and I wanted to clarify that when I did this video. And now I'm at the last 3 stitches, and those edge stitches are always the same on every row. And now I am going to turn to the wrong side row, and these edge stitches are the same on the wrong side row, where you're slipping one, knitting one, slipping one, and what that does is make a fun little integrated I-cord edging. And now I am going to purl to the end of the needle. And I think when we get through the end of this row, you're really going to have a good idea of what to do here. And I'm only to the end of the needle. I don't have a stitch marker here. I'm going to turn myself clockwise. I'm going to push the top needle back. I am going to pull that bottom needle out. And again, when I go to work here, kind of have your fabric folded a little bit. So when you go to purl into that first stitch, you don't end up with a long float right there. And now I'm going to purl to the last 3 stitches and work those last 3 edge stitches. You're only going to need to do this for about 16 rows. So that's like 8 sets of rows 1 and 2 until your fabric will have gotten far enough away from that center cast on that you'll be able to work flat without having to pull your needle out for doing that turn. It's really fun when you get to that spot, because then you're just kind of like in the home free Netflixing, not having to think. So did I say Netflixing? I meant Knitflixing, not having to think too much about it until you get to the decrease section of your Hoodola. So if you have any questions, I would love to hear them. You can leave comments below. I have a knit along thread set up both in our Facebook group and in our Ravelry group. I have so many ideas for these cowls. I have 2 that somebody else is helping me knit because I want to show you like some different ideas for yarns. I think we're going to be able to line them, which would be really fun, especially for those of us with curly hair. If we're used to our hair getting really frizzy in the winter from what we're pulling up, having silk on the inside is going to be really nice. I'm so excited to see what you all do with your Hoodolas. Thank you so much, and happy knitting.